long before humanity existed, before dust was molded into flesh and life breathed its first breath, even before the command, "Let there be light," echoed through the voids. There had already been other attempts at creation, worlds preceding ours. Spiritual realities not recorded in the Bible, but as real as our own, whose existence was acknowledged by the most ancient sages. This profound, veiled, almost ineffable teaching is known in Kabbalah as the concept of the broken worlds, or in Hebrew, Shebirat HaKelim, the shattering of the vessels. According to this doctrine, God did not create the universe in a single perfect act. Perfection is not a starting point, but a goal. Creation is a process that involves failures, adjustments, expansions, and collapses. Kabbalah teaches that before the current world, God emanated his light into other systems, spiritual structures called vessels. But these vessels were fragile, unstable. They could not contain the intensity of the divine light poured into them. And then occurred the first great cosmic cataclysm. The vessels shattered, and with them, the worlds they sustained. Fragments of these vessels were scattered throughout creation, particles of light trapped in spiritual debris, echoes of a previous design. What tradition calls the fallen sparks, we might refer to as the memory of worlds that no longer exist. Here arises something deeply unsettling. Some of the entities that inhabited those broken worlds did not disappear completely. Not all were destroyed. Some became trapped between dimensions. Others were integrated, disguised, hidden among us. And others, the most radical, were simply set aside from the divine will, not out of rebellion, but due to structural misalignment. These creatures did not fall like Lucifer, nor did they sin like the Watcher angels. They simply did not fit. They were the result of a cosmos that could no longer sustain itself. And that misalignment was enough for them to be set aside, not judged, not cursed, just misaligned, exiled. In the Zohar, a fundamental text of Jewish mysticism, it is described that at the root of everything exists a tension between the desire for absolute justice and the desire for infinite mercy. That tension, when unbalanced, generates fracture, rupture, collapse. And the broken worlds did not collapse due to a lack of beauty, but because of an excess of intensity, because there was not yet an adequate structure to contain the eternal. And here comes the most disturbing part. The human soul contains fragments of those broken worlds. We are not merely creatures of this universe. We are also heirs of the previous ones. Within us we carry sparks of light trapped in spiritual debris, desires we do not understand, anguish that does not originate from this life, voices we cannot name, because they come from other structures, because we have been woven with remnants from before. If this is true, then not only is the universe attempting to complete itself, but so are we. Our spiritual struggle is not merely between good and evil. It is the battle to recover the lost harmony of collapsed worlds. Each act of kindness, each meditation, each awakening of consciousness is an attempt to gather a spark, to repair a fragment, to rebuild creation from within. Therefore, Kabbalah does not speak of redemption as an event, but of tikkun, repair. And repair is not only moral, it is ontological. It means returning the broken pieces to their place, reactivating the harmony that existed before the collapse, reconstructing not only the universe but the original divine intentions. Yehidim, the beings that never move and sustain the immovable center of the universe. At the innermost heart of heaven, where even the seraphim fold their wings and fall silent, there exists a place that very few texts dare to name. It is not a space as we understand it. It has no color, no shape, no direction. It is the absolute center, the point of pure emanation, the root of the throne itself. There, in that abyss of unmoving light, dwell the Yehidim, the only ones. The Yehidim do not appear in the canonical Bible. They are mentioned in veiled form in some passages of the Zohar, in hidden texts of the Merkabah, and in esoteric midrashim that only the deepest sages dare to study. They are considered the oldest and purest beings that exist, not because they were created first, but because they were created closest to the name, closest to the pure mystery we call God. What exactly are the Yehidim? They have no wings because they do not need to fly. They have no eyes because they do not need to see. They make no sound because they are the sound before sound. Their existence is so intimately bound to divinity that their mere presence sustains invisible dimensions, cosmic orders that no other being can even perceive. They are not worshippers. They are worship itself. They do not praise. They embody the primordial vibration of the eternal holy. The name Yehidim in Hebrew comes from Yahid, meaning only, indivisible. Not just because each of these beings is singular, but because they are the manifestation of divine unity, unfragmented, preceding all division and plurality. Before time existed, before being was separated from non-being, before there was a beginning and end, the Yehidim were already there, not as independent entities, but as reflections of the unmanifested divine thought. Mystical tradition teaches that while angels act, cherubim guard, seraphim proclaim, and Aphanims spin, the Yehidim simply exist, and their mere existence is an act of cosmic stability. They do nothing, they do not move, but everything in the universe that moves around them. In the Book of the Celestial Dwellings, a lost text attributed to sages of Akiva's school, it is stated that the Yehidim vibrate with every thought of God, not as a reaction, but as direct resonance. They receive no orders, they have no will, they are crystallized divine will. And that is why they have never been seen in prophetic visions, nor mentioned by Moses, Isaiah, or John. They do not descend, they do not ascend, they do not respond. They are the axis. Some commentators dare to associate them with the 24 elders mentioned in Revelation, seated around the throne, not speaking, not moving, casting down their crowns in silence. But that is merely a shadow. The Yehidim have no ceremonial function. No mission can be assigned to them. They are beyond language, beyond form. They are like the pure soul of creation, its immovable core. And then arises an inevitable question. Why were they created? What purpose is there in a creature that does not communicate, does not act, does not manifest? The answer, according to the sages of Kabbalah, is as perplexing as it is revealing. Even God, in order to create, needed a fixed point, like the center of a wheel that does not spin, but allows everything else to turn. The Yehidim are that center, the unshakable pillar, the absolute witness. Their existence is the only thing that remains when everything else changes. They are the preservers of the essence of the eternal, while the universe expands, collapses, is reborn, and evolves. In the Midrash Tamuna, something disturbing is mentioned, that when the end of days comes, when all veils are lifted and the final name of God is spoken, the Yehidim will not move, because they are already where they need to be. They do not need redemption. They were not touched by the fall. They did not take part in the rebellion. They cannot be touched by error, for they have no free will. And that is what makes them unique. They are not holy by choice. They are holy by structure. They are the only thing that never deviated from the original design. Can they be seen? No, not even the seraphim can gaze directly at them. It is said that the space surrounding the Yehidim is so dense with glory, so charged with essential purity, that any created being that attempts to approach would dissolve into essence. That is why they dwell in the celestial Holy of Holies, the place about which nothing can be spoken without profaning its mystery. And yet, some claim that, although invisible, their presence can be felt, in moments of absolute silence, in the pause between one breath and another, in the depth of a wordless prayer. There, where the soul stops seeking and simply surrenders. Some mystics believe we are brushing against the vibration of the Yehidim. They are proof that there is a part of the universe that never fell, that never doubted, that never suffered, and that sustains, like an eternal root, everything that has been, is, and will be. If the Yehidim were to disappear, everything would collapse, because there is no creation without a still point. There is no dance without a center. There is no story without primordial silence. That is why, though hidden, though never mentioned, they are the true guardians of cosmic balance. Not with swords, not with songs, but with silence. And perhaps that is why even God himself, when he rests on the seventh day, does not create, does not speak, does not judge. He simply is, Because that day, Shabbat, is the earthly echo of the place where the Yehidim dwell, those who never fell, the difference between pre-angelic beings and all other creations. In the vast fabric of the universe, where worlds rise and collapse, where civilizations are born, struggle and disappear, there is one constant that remains unshaken. It is not a star. It is not a physical law. It is a category of existence untouched by error, doubt, pride, or fall. A type of being that needs no redemption because it never experienced rupture. These are the pre-angelic beings. Unlike angels who were granted will to obey or rebel. Unlike humans who live in tension between flesh and spirit. These beings do not partake in the cosmic drama. Their function, if it can even be called that, is to be the silent foundation of all that exists. But what makes them incorruptible? What separates them from the beginning, from the risk of the fall? The key lies in their relationship to desire. Every created being, whether spiritual or material, contains at its core a form of longing, an impulse toward something. Knowledge, divine presence, love, glory. This impulse, this desire, is what enables spiritual evolution, but also the fall. Lucifer fell for desiring what was not his. Humanity fell for craving knowledge and power beyond what was allowed. Desire is the root of freedom, and also of error. But the pre-angelic beings were not created with desire, not because they were imperfect, but because their purpose was never to advance, but to uphold. They do not look forward, they do not seek, they do not long. They are the rest of creation, its unmoving center. Lacking desire, they also lack the possibility of deviation. They do not obey because no commands are given to them. They do not serve because they have no dynamic function. They do not praise because they were not made to speak. They simply exist as part of divine equilibrium. In the tradition of Kabbalah, it is taught that before God created the world, he withdrew part of his infinite light in an act called tzimtzum. This withdrawal created a space of possibility, but that space, that apparent void, was not chaos. It was already structured, already supported by an invisible architecture that was not created in time, but simultaneously with the act of withdrawal. And it was at that moment that the pre-angelic beings emerged, not as a reaction, but as a condition, not as an effect, but as the structural base of being itself. Some esoteric texts teach that the universe needs 3 types of pillars to avoid collapse. The pillar of movement, represented by the Ophanim, spinning endlessly around the throne. The pillar of fire, represented by the Hayat HaKodesh, the holy beings ablaze with glory and sanctity. And the pillar of absolute stillness, represented by the Yehidim, the only ones who never move. These 3 axes do not act as practical functions. They act as absolute presences. Without them, the throne of God could not manifest. And without the throne, there would be no emanation. And without emanation, nothing. Everything would collapse into a formless abyss. And the angels, where do they fit into this scheme? Angels come afterward. They are the dynamic reaction of creation to God's will. They are like the voice that answers, the energy that executes, the messenger who carries, the protector who defends. They are glorious creatures, yes, but they are also actors in the cosmic story, which means they can choose wrongly, as Lucifer and his host did. Angelical freedom is not a superior privilege. It is a responsibility that implies risk. And that risk was the price paid for allowing creation to be truly free. Humans, on the other hand, are even more fragile. They were created not only with desire, but also with flesh, with limitation, with ignorance. They do not simply fall, they are born fallen. Their path is one of ascent, redemption, return. Humanity exists on a journey between shadow and light, between error and glory. But the pre-angelic beings have no such path. They do not rise or fall. They are outside spiritual time. They are not born. They do not evolve. They do not die. They are the perpetual witnesses of the eternal throne. And that is why they never fell. Not because they are better, but because they were created for a different purpose. While the rest of creation is part of the story, they are part of the structure of the stage. That is why we do not see them. They do not speak to us. They do not appear, but without them the entire play would collapse. In texts like the Sefer HaBahir and the Zohar, it is suggested that some of these beings support the very Sephirot, the emanations of God that govern each aspect of existence: mercy, wisdom, judgment, beauty, truth. They are not the attributes themselves, but without them, the attributes could not manifest. They are like the invisible socket that anchors each spiritual pillar of the universe. And perhaps this is the most unsettling truth. In esoteric tradition, it is taught that the fall of the world was not caused by a single act, but by the rupture of balance among the forces. When judgment became too severe, when mercy was weakened, when the channels ceased to be sustained in harmony. And there lies the final reason why the pre-angelic beings must never fall. Because if even one of them were to lose its stillness, the entire universe would destabilize. And if this is true, then everything, absolutely everything that exists, from galaxies to consciousness, is upheld by a silence no one hears, by a stillness no one notices, by a center that has never ceased to be. And that center, that does not seek, that does not desire, that does not change, is the closest thing to the hidden name of God, the return of the invisible core. Will the pre-angelic beings be revealed at the end of time? At the heart of every spiritual tradition, no matter how diverse or distant, there is always a constant. The end of time is not merely a conclusion, but a revelation, an unveiling, a moment in which what was hidden will be seen, not as a grand spectacle for the senses, but as an absolute truth that will collapse all false perceptions. And among all that could be revealed in that final instant, there is a possibility that theology has barely touched. That the pre-angelic beings, those who never fell, never spoke, never intervened, may be manifested to the universe as the hidden pillars upon which everything was built. Imagine this scenario. In the instant when heaven and earth pass away, as prophesied in Revelation, when the corruptible vanishes and only the eternal remains, structures will emerge before our eyes that were never seen by any human gaze nor contemplated by angels, not because they didn't exist, but because their function was invisible by nature, too essential, too intimately divine to be revealed before the appointed time. Revelation speaks of a throne surrounded by living beings, elders who cast down their crowns, and 7 spirits of God that shine like lamps. But there are moments in the text when John falls silent, as if seeing more than he can, or is permitted to, describe. An unnamed presence, a vision not relayed, a knowledge that, even amid the most powerful revelation, remains veiled. What is it that John saw and did not say? What presence was so absolute that it could only be sensed, not explained? Some Kabbalists and Christian mystics have suggested that, at the end of time, not only will Christ return, not only will justice be restored, but the hidden name of God will once again be pronounced in its complete form. That name which exists in no human tongue, which cannot be spoken aloud, which cannot be written. A name which, according to some Hebrew traditions, was shared only with the first conscious beings, the silent witnesses of the abyss before time. And here arises a powerful connection. If the lost name, the complete name, was known only by the pre-angelic beings, then its revelation also implies their return or manifestation. It would be like a convergence. The final word, the final seal, will not be a spoken phrase, but a revealed structure, an eternal pattern that has always been there, but which only at the end can be contemplated. In the most esoteric writings of Jewish tradition, such as the Sefer Raziel and certain hidden layers of the Zohar, there is a profound teaching that every creative act of God left a structural resonance, a sort of spiritual mold embedded into the fabric of the universe. And these molds, these eternal templates, are conscious beings, not abstract ideas. They are forms of existence that neither think nor choose, but vibrate with the immutable will. One of these texts affirms, "When the final veil is torn, there will be no sound, no vision, only the presence of those who were before the beginning and who will remain after the end." These are the pre-angelic beings. They are not functional presences. They are the living architecture of the eternal. The Zohar teaches that the physical world is merely a shell, a husk. What truly matters is what lies beneath, what has always remained silent. And that in the final days, when the tree of life is restored in its fullness, the channels that sustain the infinite light will be visibly perceived by the elevated souls. What if the Ophanim, the thrones, the Yehidim, the Hayot HaKodesh, and others yet unnamed, are these channels? What if seeing them won't be like seeing an angel descend from the sky, but like seeing for the first time the complete design of the universe, the sacred geometry that has always upheld us? Revealed as being, not symbol, this will not be a theatrical appearance. They will not descend with trumpets. They will be revealed, because the veil between the visible and the invisible will no longer exist. And in that instant, we will understand that they were never hidden. We were simply blind. But this revelation will not be for everyone, according to the ancients. Only those who have elevated their consciousness, only those who have attuned their soul to the divine silence, will be able to recognize the first ones, not because they are hiding, but because their language is neither visual nor verbal. It is structural, it is pure presence. Some Gnostic texts speak of this moment as the return of the unfallen thought. That is, the restoration of spiritual memory, that there once was a prior order, a structural purity, an intelligence that needs no movement to be alive, and that thought does not manifest in ideas, but in beings. Perhaps that is the true apocalypse, not destruction, but the removal of illusion. The end is not the end. It is finally seeing what has always been, seeing the first ones, the ones who uphold, the ones who spin, the ones who blaze, the ones who never spoke, but never remained silent. And when that happens, human beings will understand their true place, not at the top of creation, but between what is created and seeks, and what is eternal and sustains. Because in the beginning they were, and in the end they will be, the ones who never fell. The difference between pre-angelic beings and all other creations. Within the vast fabric of the universe, where worlds rise and collapse, where civilizations are born, fight and vanish, there is one constant that remains unmoved. It is not a star. It is not a physical law. It is a category of existence untouched by error, doubt, pride, or the fall. A type of being that needs no redemption, because it never knew rupture. These are the pre-angelic beings, unlike the angels who were endowed with will, able to obey or rebel, unlike humans who live in the tension between flesh and spirit. These beings do not take part in the cosmic drama. Their function, if it can even be called that, is to serve as the silent foundation of all that exists. But what makes them incorruptible? What separates them from the beginning, from the risk of falling? The key lies in their relationship with desire. Every created being, spiritual or material, contains at its core a form of longing, an impulse towards something, knowledge, divine presence, love, glory. This impulse, this desire, is what makes spiritual evolution possible. But also the fall. Lucifer fell for desiring what was not his. The human being fell for craving knowledge and power beyond what was permitted. Desire is the root of freedom, and also of error. But pre-angelic beings were not created with desire. Not because they are imperfect, but because their purpose was never to advance, but to sustain. They do not look ahead. They do not seek. They do not yearn. They are the rest of creation, its unmoving center. Lacking desire, they also lack the possibility of deviation. They do not obey, because they are not given orders. They do not serve, because they have no dynamic function. They do not praise, because they were not made to speak. They simply exist, as part of divine balance. In the Kabbalistic tradition, it is taught that before God created the world, he withdrew part of his infinite light in an act called Tzimtzum. This withdrawal created a space of possibility. But that space, that apparent void, was not chaos. It was already structured, already sustained by an invisible architecture. Not created in time, but simultaneously with the act of withdrawal. And it was at that moment that the pre-angelic beings emerged. Not as a response, but as a condition. Not as an effect, but as the structural basis of being. Some esoteric texts teach that the universe requires 3 types of pillars to avoid collapse. The pillar of movement, represented by the Ophanim, ceaselessly spinning around the throne. The pillar of fire, represented by the Hayot HaKodesh, the burning beings of glory and holiness. The pillar of absolute stillness, represented by the Yehidim, the unique ones who never move. These 3 axes do not function as practical roles. They operate as absolute presences. Without them, the throne of God could not manifest. And without the throne, there would be no emanation. And without emanation, nothing. All would collapse into formless void. And the angels? Where do they fit into this scheme? The angels come afterward. They are the dynamic reaction of creation to God's will. They are like the responding voice, the energy that executes, the messenger who delivers, the guardian who protects. They are glorious beings, yes, but also actors in the cosmic narrative, which means they can choose wrongly, as Lucifer and his host did. Angelic freedom is not a superior privilege. It is a responsibility that involves risk. And that risk was the price for allowing creation to be truly free. Humans, on the other hand, are even more fragile. They were created not only with desire, but also with flesh, with limitation, with ignorance. Not only can they fall, they are born fallen. Their path is one of ascent, redemption, return. Humanity exists in a journey between shadow and light, error and glory. But pre-angelic beings do not walk that path. They do not rise or fall. They exist outside spiritual time. They are not born. They do not evolve. They do not die. They are the eternal witnesses of the divine throne. And for that reason, they never fell. Not because they are better, but because they were created for a different purpose. While all other creatures are part of the story, they are part of the structure of the stage. And for that reason, we do not see them. They do not speak to us. They do not appear, but without them, the entire play would collapse. In texts like the Sefer HaBahir and the Zohar, it is suggested that some of these creatures uphold the Sephirot themselves, the emanations of God that govern every aspect of existence: mercy, wisdom, judgment, beauty, truth. They are not the attributes themselves, but without them, the attributes could not manifest. They are like the invisible base where each spiritual pillar of the universe is anchored, and perhaps this is the most unsettling part. In the esoteric tradition, it is taught that the fall of the world did not happen because of a single act, but because of a rupture in the balance of forces. When judgment became too severe, when mercy was weakened, when the channels stopped being held in harmony. And that is the ultimate reason why the pre-angelic beings must not fall. Because if even one of them were to lose its stillness, the entire universe would become unstable. And if this is true, then everything, absolutely everything that exists, from galaxies to consciousness, is sustained by a silence no one hears, by a stillness no one notices, by a center that has never ceased to be. And that center, that does not seek, that does not desire, that does not change, is the closest thing to the hidden name of God,